Good day, everybody. Today we are going to discuss another very important, interesting, but a dangerous doctrine, which is authoritarian state. Something which goes against democracy, which goes against the very basic ethics of democracy and its values like liberty, equality, fraternity, and justice. The effort in this lecture would be to know what is an authoritarian regime, what is an authoritarian state, how does it function, what is its nature. We'll try to classify the different authoritarian regimes which are functional in Asia and Latin America, because that is the focus of the paper. We will also try to understand how the authoritarian state controls its citizens, what are the limitations it places on its citizens, what are the instruments it uses to control its citizens, and we will try to reach the foregone conclusion that authoritarian state is the biggest detriment, the biggest obstacle to democracy, because democracy is one form of government, as we've been studying from lower classes, which is a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. Democracy believes in feedback, it believes in liberty, equality, justice, which are kept away from any authoritarian state. Authoritarian state is not based on the consent of the people. It does not believe in feedback. It does not believe in doubting or questioning the government. It is a government which is from above. There is no feedback. It is a government which does not have any legitimacy, because even if elections are held, elections are a farce. You might have candidates who owe their allegiance only to the ruling party or to the ruling dictator. There might be cases of large-scale proxy voting, or people not coming to the polling booths, but the votes nevertheless being cast. So, authoritarian state does not believe in rule of law. It does not believe in dissent, no questioning, no answering questions, no criticism, because it believes in ruling with an iron hand. An authoritarian state believes in repression, and it practices it to an intense scale. The critics can be purged, that is cleaned. How the purging is done, one can read in different books, accounts of prisoners who came back from jails or reform houses, or the followers can be sent to the concentration camps. They can be sent to an exile. The process is intense, cruel, brutal. So an authoritarian state believes in repression. It does not believe in giving liberties and equalities to its citizens, because it has its own connotations of justice. It has its own definition of rule of law, which can take a flip whenever the people who are to be obliged or to be punished change. An authoritarian state does not believe in pluralism. It does not believe in plurality of ideas. It believes in pursuing and focusing on a fixed line of thought, which goes according to the ruler, which goes according to the dictator, or to the people in power. Now, there is a difference between a totalitarian form of government and an authoritarian form of government. Authoritarian form of government can be said to be a little better than the totalitarian state. In the latter, there is no difference between the state and the society. The difference between state and society is completely eliminated, and it is a more rigorous, more acute, more dangerous form of a state than the authoritarian regime. Not that the authoritarian regime is better, but when we compare these two, we can say the authoritarian regime believes in putting to rest any criticism on the political field and tries to control the economic field, but the social field to some extent is left untouched. But in a totalitarian form of government, the control is complete on the state as well as on the society. Now, an authoritarian regime can be of different kinds. It can be a despotic state, it can be a dictatorship, it can be a tyranny, it can be a monarchy, it can be a dictatorship, but we come down to the conclusion, whatever the name of the state, once you say it is a dictatorship or an authoritarian form of government, you can forget about liberty, equality, justice, fraternity, prospering, establishing itself and thriving in that state. There is no place for these very, very important values of democracy. While talking about authoritarian states in Asia, let's just jump across the boundary and reach to our immediate neighbor, that is Pakistan, where you have a very lethal combination of the military and the bureaucracy. Pakistan is a very, very interesting case study because it's a neighbor, because once upon a time it was part of India, which was divided in 1947. A democracy was established in both the countries in the same year, that is 1947. But the difference in the performance of the political system is huge. India stands much above Pakistan. Now, when we come to Pakistan, the army has been very, very active in the civilian affairs. So you've had General Ayub Khan, then General Yahya Khan, General Zia, General Pervez Musharraf, who have called the shots. We have the concept of the military calling the shots in Pakistan, and the Prime Minister, who is elected by the people, always looking over his shoulder to seek the opinion of the military masters. This might change, this might not change because of the new army chief. We have to wait and watch. Now we go to another country, another neighboring country, Nepal, which is our neighboring country. There's a lot of give and take between these two countries, and which is only increasing by the day. Now, Nepal is the only Hindu kingdom. In 1955, King Mahendra ascended the throne, and he completely bypassed the Council of Ministers. He ruled on his own, according to his own whims and fancies. His son ascended the throne in 1972, and he was King Birendra. Now, King Birendra also ruled the kingdom with an iron hand, and he bypassed whatever criticism would be with the village councils, which he had set up in every village, where he got his constant feedback about his critics, about his supporters. But in the 1990s, there was a wave of democracy all over the world, and Nepal could not remain immune to that. In 1990, after a lot of protest, King Birendra handed over the powers to the parliament, and Nepal became a constitutional monarchy. Powers shifted to the parliament. Now, King Birendra was very happy, or he adjusted himself to the situation till 2001. In 2001, King Birendra, his wife, the whole family had gathered for a function, and they were killed by his son, King Birendra's son, who was in a drunken state, and he came and shot the whole family. The reasons are unknown. Then he was put into prison, and King Birendra's brother, King Gayendra, became the king. As soon as he became the king, he decided to turn back the clock of time, and he took back the powers of the parliament in 2005. Now, the people were not in a mood to part away with powers, which they had taken after a lot of struggle. The stir started. There was a mass mobilization. People came down on the streets, on the roads, and they asked for powers. King Gayendra suppressed all the political activists, all the political activities, but the people were not to be bowed down. And ultimately, in April 2006, the King Gayendra, had to hand over powers to the seven-party alliance. The different parties had come together to form the seven-party alliance, and Girija Prasad Koirala was handed over the powers. He became the prime minister. So King Gayendra, then before him King Birendra, before him King Mahindra, all ruled the Hindu kingdom on their own whims and fancies, brushing aside the public opinion. But at last, the will of the people prevailed. And in 2006, which is known as the second wave of democracy, democracy was installed again in Nepal. Now from Nepal, we move to another big neighbor, our big brother, China, which has declared itself a communist state. China is one country which can be clearly put up as an authoritarian state. The Communist Party of China, totally in control. Elections are there, but you do not have a choice between parties. You have a choice between candidates, all of them, all the candidates owing their allegiance to the Communist Party of China. Now you have a choice between candidates, but you do not have a choice between parties. There's only one party, that is the Communist Party. Now, repression is acute, it is intense, no dissent is tolerated. We have the example of the leader of China who heralded in the change, who got the Communist Party in power, Mao, who announced his Great Leap Forward scheme, which proved to be a disaster. After some time, in 1954, he tried to he started a damage control exercise in which whatever losses, millions of lives had been lost under the Great Leap Forward, where agriculture was experimented with, and which led to a lot of starvation. A lot of lives, millions of lives were lost over there. So he tried to control that damage by announcing a cultural revolution. Now, in the cultural revolution, he encouraged people to come up with dissent. But when the dissent was there, he sent his Red Guards to suppress the people and suppress any kind of dissent. They moved around with the Red Book, asking young boys and girls to leave the school and colleges. Most of the young boys and girls did it just to save themselves, to save their lives. The Red Guards became so powerful that they started fighting amongst themselves, and Mao lost control over them. After Mao, there was a power struggle. Deng Xiaoping came ahead. He emerged as a winner. He was a liberal leader initially. He was the one who encouraged dissent, who encouraged the MNCs to come into China. But the Tiananmen Square, because he encouraged students to come up and discuss the lacunas in the Communist Party. The Tiananmen Square happened, which is a very unfortunate incident, and it also was surprising for the people of China. Why? Because Deng Xiaoping himself, who was supposed to be a soft line leader, became converted or turned back into hardliner. And what happened in Tiananmen Square was another example of an authoritarian state. Students, young boys and girls, sat in Tiananmen Square chanting the need for democracy, welcoming democracy in their country, in their lives. But on the night of 3rd and 4th June 1985, Deng Xiaoping and his colleagues decided to use brutal force on the young students. Many students were gunned down. The rest of them were taken as prisoners, put into various prisons. Some of them who escaped to the US later told harrowing tales about the treatment which was meted out to them. So China is an authoritarian state which does not tolerate any kind of criticism. For them, the Communist Party is the vehicle of social change, and it is only the Communist Party which can deliver to the people whatever they need, not what they desire, but what they need. So the Communist Party is another example in China of running an authoritarian state. So in China, it is no to public scrutiny. It is a no to any kind of freedom of speech and expression. Everything is contained within the Communist Party of China. The State Council is controlled by the Communist Party. The National People's Congress is controlled by the Communist Party. The People's Liberation Army is controlled by the Communist Party, and so is China's People's Political Consultative Conference, controlled by the Communist Party. Everything is within the Communist Party, nothing beyond, nothing outside the Communist Party. It decides what is going to happen in China, which winds of change will be accepted, which will be rejected. It is the Communist Party which is running an authoritarian state, that is China. Now from China we move to our another neighbor, that is Burma or Myanmar, which has been under the control of army generals for a long time. In Burma or Myanmar, we have had monks who have resisted the army generals peacefully. They have also been tortured, they have been repressed. Their famous candlelight march, which was a silent one, shook the world. The Nobel Prize winner, Aung San Suu Kyi, was kept in jail for many decades. She has been recently released. It's only in the recent past that the army generals have decided to share power. They have decided to hold elections. They have decided to usher in democracy, but how far it is implemented in the true sense is another story, and we'll have to wait and watch in the coming few years to see how Myanmar adjusts itself to a world where democracy is in fashion. In Turkmenistan, in Central Asia, we have the example of President Niyazov, who rules by decree. He said he could dissolve the parliament anytime. He appointed the chairman of the Supreme Court on his own whims and fancy. He could appoint his own council of ministers without parliamentary supervision. He did not believe in asking people or taking their feedback. He did many strange things. For example, he got a gold statue made which would revolve which would keep changing direction according to the changing sun. So you have in an authoritarian state rulers who maintain a hold on their people by so many instruments. For example, every day when the news starts, it has to start with a prayer for the well-being of President Niyazov. So much so that he changed the names of the months of the year according to the names of his family members, relatives, sons and daughters. So these are the instruments psychologically that the ruling dictator, that the dictator controls the people of the state. Besides this, the added pomp, show, glamour, all that adds to the aura of the dictatorship or the aura of the dictator and dictatorial regime, which helps the dictator to continue with his authoritarian streak. While talking about our neighbors and the authoritarian regime in and around India, it would be partial if we would not discuss a very sensitive and a very controversial period in India where the people of India tasted what it means to live in an authoritarian state. I'm talking about the emergency which was imposed for 21 long months, starting from 25th June 1975 to 21st March 1977, when Mrs. Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister of India, imprisoned political leaders, all the critics who tried to oppose her. Civil liberties of the common people were suppressed, and she ruled by decree. So India also has had its 21-month long dark age where we moved away from democracy and we moved towards an authoritarian state. But the people of India who were termed as ignorant, who were illiterate, poor, did not know much about democracy, gave a befitting reply when elections were held. They did not elect Indira Gandhi as the Prime Minister again. So the message went out loud and clear to all the leaders, past, present, future of India, that the Indian population, the Indian electorate might be ignorant, might be poor, might be selfish, might be unaware of many things, but when it comes to democracy, we better not fiddle with it. Now we fly to another country, that is Cuba. Fidel Castro died a few days back. He ruled the country with an iron hand. We have had stories of arbitrary arrests, punishment, firing squads being used very liberally for the opponents. Fidel Castro ruled with the help of his younger brother Raul Castro, whom he gave power about a decade back, but he continued to rule. But even when Raul Castro came to power, the message was loud and clear that there might be a change in the leader, but they believed in the same ideology. Fidel Castro gave universal health care and education to everybody, but to the citizens of Cuba, but brought economic ruin to the country. Following communism, even Fidel Castro did not believe in giving freedom of speech and expression, freedom to dissent, freedom to express your opinion, or to stage protests, dharnas or strikes to his people. He believed in ruling, and ruling with a very firm hand. There were people who were very happy with him. There were people who left the island, swam across to USA to a better future. But Fidel Castro did not relent till his death. He believed in controlling the people and leading it from the front. Another very interesting country, Chile, which was ruled by Augusto Pinochet for many, many years. He suspended all political activities. He suspended or made it illegal for any person to have any political party, so there were no political parties. He had a secret police called DINA, which went from house to house searching people, whoever was opposing Augusto Pinochet, and they just disappeared, and the victim just disappeared. He is famous for having his caravans of death, which moved from one village, from one town to the other town, from one village to the other town, massacring people, scrutinizing the population, getting feedback, and drawing in conclusion as to who is against the authoritarian regime, and then they would be put to death. So they were known as caravans of death. So that is the story of another country which was an authoritarian state for a long time, headed by Augusto Pinochet, a very, very brutal dictator who tolerated no dissent. Venezuela, a country which has given many Miss Universe and many Miss Worlds to the world, does not boast of such a beautiful world when it comes to political activities or the political scenario. President Chavez eroded the freedom of the press. He suspended or sent back all the foreign journalists so that no news would be able to penetrate outside, would be able to go outside Chile. He reduced the powers of the Supreme Court. And when it came to separation of powers, he just did not believe in it. He just did not believe in separation of powers and checks and balances. Power was concentrated in his hand, and he ruled by his own decree. South Africa, another country which spoke about or which openly practiced apartheid, that is discrimination on the basis of color. The Pretoria regime, which was boycotted by many countries, so much so that many countries except England refused to even play cricket with the Africans, which was supposed to be a very strong team, made very interesting matches, but did not have even a single black member in its team. Pretoria regime committed atrocities against the black population. The black population, the Africans, were displaced from their own land and sent into ghettos. They lived in slums which stank of unhygienic conditions, poverty, disease, malnutrition. They needed cards to visit the white areas to work, and if anybody was caught without carrying an identity card or without a card, he or she was punished brutally. Marriage alliances between the white population and the black population were discouraged. It was considered a big no, and it was only after a lot of pressure by the world and the untiring efforts and sacrifice of Nelson Mandela, a leader of huge stature, that the Pretoria regime had to bow down and give away the powers to the Africans, where the blacks and whites would live equally like equal citizens. Egypt, which has been ruled by 60 years by dictators. You had President Nasir, then Anwar Sadat, and then Hosni Mubarak. A country ruled by dictators under authoritarian regime for 60 years, where there's no freedom of press, no freedom of speech, expressions. Everything is controlled by the dictator. Everything is controlled by his coterie, group of close advisors, where the citizens don't have a say, no feedback is encouraged, no feedback is asked. The list of authoritarian regimes is endless. We have had example of Charles Taylor in Liberia, who ruled brutally. He punished people by throwing them off the aeroplane. His critics were not allowed to live, and they were killed very brutally, giving a message to all the other population that if they would go against him or speak against him or even think about criticizing him, they would meet with the same fate. We have had President Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe, again, who ruled with an iron hand. We've had example of the very famous Saddam Hussein, whose gory tales of putting to death his opponents just do not end. A minister differed with him on a certain issue. He took him to the other room, excused himself, called the minister to the other room, shot him dead. President Saddam Hussein believed that the son, if a person is killed, all the sons should be put to death, because the son always grows up to take his father's revenge. So a minister once the minister is killed, all his sons were killed, and his daughters and wife were on the roads because their house was bulldozed. So this is authoritarian regime, and how they keep a control on the people by fear, by punishments. So we can summarize by saying that to lead a dignified life, to lead a life of self-respect, democracy is the solution. A democratic form of government is the solution, and an authoritarian regime has to be kept at bay. But there are many excuses for an authoritarian regime to establish itself or to surge ahead. There are many reasons. Political instability. That is the time when the situation is ripe for an authoritarian regime to establish itself. Poverty. These are just two of the reasons where vested interests. These are just few of the reasons where an authoritarian regime can establish itself. but we have to keep authoritarian regimes at an arm's length. It should not be encouraged at any cost. We can conclude that authoritarian state and authoritarian regime is dangerous because it strikes at the very roots of a democratic structure, at the very roots of a democratic society, at the very root of a democratic state. An authoritarian regime believes in ruling by force, coercion, manipulation, and violence. It is not to be welcomed anywhere. It is democracy which is to be welcomed, which is to be worshipped, and which is to be encouraged.